Okay guys, so this video is going to be looking at the poem The Famine Road by Eavan Boland. Now, so before we want to start our analysis, I want to think about the title The Famine Road. So do you know anything about the treatment of the Irish people by the government during the years of the famine? And of course the government was the British government based in London. How did they treat the Irish public, the Irish people, during the time of the famine? Right, so what I want to do today is we're going to analyse the language and story of the poem. There's also important structural features in this poem that we really need to look at in detail. Right, now if we go back to this question at the start, most of you really all will have studied history at junior cert and will have touched off on the famine. Right? What we'll know about the famine is that really the government in Britain at the time was very much criticised for not doing a lot for the people of Ireland during the famine. In certain contexts, the Irish famine has been studied as genocide, and that is very much a contested point of view, but it has been considered, and this is due to the fact that rather than really giving aid and charity to the Irish people during this time, the government very much continued to send certain types of food away from Ireland rather than giving it to the starving Irish people. Irish people were also put to work rather than being given relief. They were put to work and told, okay, here's some work for you to do, and when you've completed this work, then you will be given food in return for it, rather than just being given food because they were starving. Now, at the time, this is not a totally out there point of view. Okay, this is not that strange, and we need to keep that in mind. This was somewhat how people looked at things at the time. Is that you can't just give. They weren't of the opinion that you just give food or you give charity. Rather, you encourage people to work so that they realise that hard work will get them what they need. However, when you take people who are starving and as destitute as the Irish population was during the famine, you really are. What's happening by making them work is you actually, to a large extent, a lot of people making their situation a lot worse. Now, one of the jobs that they were given to do in order to earn some money or some food was the building of roads, and these are called famine roads. So if you look at the picture being displayed at the moment, this is a famine road. Famine roads are pretty much roads that go through large areas of countryside and don't really have a huge amount of function. They're not the most important main roads. They lead from, not really from the centre of business or anything like that. They're just roads that go from one place to another. And the main function of these roads was to give work to people, so people would have something to do in order to earn something. Okay, so the famine roads are quite a contentious issue. They are put there to make people work, okay, but they don't really have the economic use that roads would generally have. Okay, so if we look at the poem itself to start off with. Idle as trout in light, Colonel Jones. These Irish, give them no coin at all. Their bones need toil, their characters no less. Trevelyan seal blooded the deal table. The relief committee deliberated. Might it be safe, Colonel, to give them roads to force from nowhere, going nowhere, of course? 1 out of every 10, and then another third of those again. Women in a case like yours. Sick, directionless they worked. Fork, stick were iron years away. After all, could they not blood their knuckles on rock, suck April hailstones for water and for food? Why, for that, cunning as housewives, each eyed as if at a corner butcher the other's buttock. Anything may have caused it. Spores, a childhood accident, one sees day after day these mysteries. Dusk. They will work tomorrow without him. They know it and walk clear. He has become a typhoid pariah, his blood tainted, although he shares it with some there. No more than snow attends its own flakes where they settle and melt will they pray by his death rattle. You never will, never you know. Take it well, woman, grow your garden, keep house, goodbye. It has gone better than we expected, Lord Trevelyan. Sedition, idleness cured in one. From parish to parish, field to field, the wretches work till they are quite worn, then fester by their work. We marched the corn to the ships in peace. This Tuesday I saw bones out of my carriage window. Your servant, Jones. Baron, never to know the load of his child in you. What is your body now, if not a famine road? Okay, so it's quite a complex poem, and structurally you'll notice that every alternate stanza is written here in italics. And the reason for this is that there's two stories going on consecutively. Right, and we're going to look at each of those stories in detail in just a minute. Okay, but your initial impressions of the poem, think, what do you notice about the structure? I've actually just pointed it out here. Does the storyline of the poem seem strange? Can you actually point out the two different storylines going on? And what connection do you think the poet is trying to draw towards the end of this poem? Alright, so we're going to flick back to the poem. When you think about those questions, I ask you to pause here. You're going to need to spend a good 5 or 6 minutes reading through this poem 2 or 3 more times, really come to an understanding of what it's about. You might want to, at one point, read all of the odd numbered stanzas, so read stanza 1, 3, 5 and 7, and look at the story. They all work together as a single story, and then look at the 2, 4, 6 and 8, and they work as a separate story. That might help you to kind of figure out the plot, but then look at it back and compare why the poet Boland has structured it in the way that she has structured it. But take a few minutes, pause the video here, and just really examine the poem in detail. Okay, so if we look back at these questions, what you know about the structure of the poem, and that's what we pointed out already, is that stanzas 1, 3, 5 and 7 work together as a single story, and stanzas 2, 4, 6 and 8 work to make a separate story. However, there is very much connection between these two stories, as we will see in a few minutes as we go into it. The two storylines that were being given. The first storyline, which is in the odd numbered stanzas, is the story of the Famine Roads. So this is Colonel Jones reporting back to Lord Trevelyan about and to the Relief Committee about the work of the roads. So he is telling, it starts off, idle as trout and light Colonel Jones, these Irish, give them no coin. This is Trevelyan's letter to the Colonel telling him, not to give the Irish any relief, to make sure that they work, that the bones need toil. Then there's a description of how they work sick, directionless they worked, fork will stick where iron years away, and saying that they worked with their hands what happened. Then as the day of the Famine Road building wears on, one of the men becomes sick with typhoid. Okay, he's seen as a typhoid pariah, and the other workers stay away from him. Now the onlookers from the who were commenting on this seem to take this as a heartlessness from the others. But really, if we look at the destitute type of life that these people are living, they are just trying to survive, and they are so starving that they can't even mourn for their dead. So really, we need to look at it from different perspectives here of what's happening there. And then finally, we have the report going back. It has gone better than we expected, Lord Trevelyan. So this is a report from Jones back to Trevelyan telling him what has gone on with the Famine Roads. The other storyline going on is the story of a woman who has been told by a doctor that she is not able to have children. Right? So we start off there, it's very statistical and it's very emotionless in the discussion. 1 out of every 10, then another third of those again. The doctor's giving the woman statistics on what's happened, the amount of women who are in the same situation as her. He gives some, he talks about how, the different causes that may have, caused her to, different stimulus that may have caused her to be unable to have children in stanza 4. Then he reiterates, you're not going to have children, tells her to go home and keep her garden and keep her house, grow her garden and keep her house, and says goodbye. And then at the end, she is compared to a famine road. Okay, and we're going to look at that comparison in detail. That's really the crux of what's going on between these two storylines. So to start off, in terms of examining it, we're going to look at each of the stanzas into pairs, okay? But a bit of background. So this is just going through again what I've just said, so I'll read through very quickly. The poem works with two separate storylines. Odd-numbered stanzas discuss the treatment of the Irish people during the famine, whereas even-numbered stanzas discuss the experience of a woman learning she cannot have children. The structure of the poem clearly indicates that the poet sees direct connection between these two topics and draws parallels between them. Okay, so we have to be able to comment on that. That's very much what she's doing with the structure here. Famine history, which is incorporated in the poem, outlines the process of what was called a relief committee. Under the politician Charles Trevelyan, these committees were set up to deal with the Irish famine crisis. Right? However, at the time, it was not thought to be a good idea to simply provide charitable aid, and as this could encourage idleness or encourage people not to work if you give them things for free. That's what they were worried about. So instead, they told the poor and starving that they were expected to work in order to get money and food. And one scheme to give these people work was to build known as the famine roads, so building roads. And these roads usually were often totally unnecessary and did not lead anywhere useful. They simply built in order to make sure people were working, in order to make sure people weren't getting things for free. Okay, so we look at stanzas 1 and 2 together. Idle as trout in light, Colonel Jones. These Irish, give them no coins at all. Their bones need toil, their characters no less. Trevelyan seal blooded the deal table. The relief committee deliberated. Might it be safe, Colonel, to give them roads? Roads to force from nowhere, going nowhere, of course? 1 out of every 10, and then another third of those again. Women in a case like yours. So what themes are established in the opening lines of the poem? What view of the Irish does the narrator seem to present in the first stanza? Do you notice anything strange about the opening of the second stanza? Why has it been printed in italics? Alright, so pause here for 2 minutes and read through those 2 stanzas quickly again. Okay, so the themes in the opening stanza, we're looking at this idea of making people work. There is definitely a lack of emotion and lack of connection. We were examining an aspect of history, and we're examining the treatment of humans. Okay, we can see their bones need toil. This is quite a heartless viewpoint from the modern context. However, it is very much what was believed at the time. Right? The relief committee then asked Colonel Jones, would it be okay to make them build roads? But of course, these should be useless roads. But would this be a good way of making them work? Okay, so we have the themes of work, we have the theme of hardship, we have the theme of cruelty being established here. Okay? Anything about the second stanza? Now, when we look at the second stanza, we'll notice that it starts in the middle of a sentence. Okay, so 1 out of every 10, then another third of those again. Women in a case like yours. So we're starting in the middle of the story, and we're starting with statistics. So again, it is important here that we notice the lack of emotion. That is really what these first 2 stanzas are. The connection that we can see being drawn between them is a complete lack of emotion by the professionals who are supposed to be taking care of people. Right? These professionals who are in charge of care are not really being caring at all. So if we look at, now I know there's a lot of notations after coming up there, right, we'll go through them one by one. The first stanza, the stanza opens with quotation marks. We are listening to words of a character. Okay, so these are the words that Trevelyan has written. Okay, the term idle is pointed and outlines the general point of the viewpoint of the government towards the suffering and starving. But Trevelyan comes across as heartless. Okay, and that is what the government was seen as at the time. The government was there not to provide charity, rather it was there to help make people work. Okay, but in a modern viewpoint, we very much see that as being quite heartless. By introducing military titles, Boland suggested the Irish were treated in a brutal and uncaring way. Okay, so to Colonel Jones and the Relief Committee, these kind of formal titles is showing that this was very much a business transaction almost, but very much there's no real emotion coming across here. And this further emphasised in the tone used in the line, these Irish, okay, very much setting the Irish as someone other. Blooded refers to the red seal on the letter from Trevelyan, so it's Trevelyan seal blooded the deal table. However, it's also the blood of the Irish being sealed by his action, that the orders he has sent are sealing the fate and the death of many Irish people, and the blood of the Irish people could be seen to be on his hands. Because of this, he has sealed their fate. The suggestion of the roads is then brought in by a character as a form of work for starving to earn their keep. And what's happening here is we're seeing the introduction of the famine roads and why they are being introduced. So Boland is giving us a bit of context, explaining to us a little bit what's going on. Okay. In the second stanza opens in the middle of an entirely different situation. Notice the lack of the capital letter there, showing us this is the middle of a sentence. There's an ambiguity at the start over what's being discussed. We haven't been told yet what's being discussed, but the language is clinical, suggesting that it's quite serious, right? And coupled with the tone of the previous stanza, the comparison will make us think that there is possibly a very negative element. the treatment of women is very much being established here as a theme of the poem. Okay, so moving on to stanzas 3 and 4. Sick, directionless they worked, fork, stick, or iron years away. After all, could they not blood their knuckles on rock, suck April hailstone for water and for food? Why, for that, cunning as housewives, each eyed as if at a corner butcher, the other's buttock. Anything may have caused it: spores, a childhood accident. One sees day after day these mysteries. Did you notice anything about the imagery being repeated from the beginning of the poem? Right? And how does the poet progress the second storyline in the fourth stanza? Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Again, pause here and think about each of those stanzas in detail. Okay, so in the next, in the first question, do you notice any imagery being repeated from the beginning of the poem? And we might see again here that it's quite clinical, okay, and we might see issues around the cruelty and the somewhat militaristic point of view. And we would look at the word blood. Okay, so we have his seal blooded, the Trevelyan seal blooded the deal table, and now we have the after all, could they not blood their knuckles? So suffering and blood is very much a part of the life of the people during the building of the Famine roads. Right? Blood is of course attached to suffering. Right? We also actually, however, have the April hailstones for food and for water, showing the destitution. And then we have the butcher in there at the end of that stanza, showing that the point of view of the British forces is that the Irish seem quite callous. But if we consider it from the perspective of the starving Irish and take a more humanitarian view of it, we will see that this is the effect of starvation, that they're actually, and it's gone so far that there's a hint of possibility of cannibalism. And there was, of course, reports of cannibalism. They were very rare. There were reports of cannibalism during the famine. The progress of the second storyline, anything may have caused it, shows us that something is quite serious, because it could have been spores, a childhood accident, but this is a mystery and people see it day after day. The aspect of this being these mysteries day after day, the doctor seems quite resigned to the fact that this is what it is and he's not really going to do much to help out here. Okay, so if we look at the notes then in a bit more detail, the speaker in the stanza is very critical of the labourers. They are why the labourers cannot blood. They ask why the labourers cannot blood their knuckles, use their hands if they don't have tools. Also critique for not being able to survive on the water and hailstones. So the narrator here is not really taking in the perspective of the Irish as starving people, rather he is seeing them as weak and people who are not willing to work hard. Okay, so it's very much a strange, a lack of understanding from the narrator of what's going on. The formality of the language further emphasises the attachment of the speaker and the lack of emotion and lack of care from the speaker for the suffering of the people that they are in charge of. And the final line refers to cannibalism, one of the most grotesque results of starvation. Okay? So a number of points here, and really what we're looking at in terms of this stanza is that complete lack of emotion and lack of care from this speaker for the starving Irish. In the next stanza then, the sense of something being wrong is enhanced by the use of the term accident. So very much that word accident is really important here. There's a definite implication of a medical issue to reference to spores. Okay, so we definitely think it's probably a doctor speaking here. And this can also be linked with the potato blight, okay, so which caused the famine was spores. Alright, so very, very clever use of the word spores there. Again, the language here is formal, and we see a lack of emotion. So it seems to mirror the language of the speaker in the famine. So really what's happening here over the course of the poem is the formality of the language and the comparisons between different situations. Boland is trying to make us think about the connection of how women are treated by the doctor as how the Irish would be treated by the relief committees during the famine. Why do you think the poet has included the phrase cunning as housewives? Okay? Perhaps that is again another connection being brought in here. Okay, the view of women in society is being critiqued, and what language stands out to describe the plight of the starving at this time? Really, that the April hailstones is a great image to use here, a very, very effective image that people, to highlight the lack of understanding of British forces and their expectation of the Irish to survive on nothing. And the use of the corner butcher is also really important here, because it shows perhaps that the lack of understanding again from the British of the destitution the Irish are in. If we move on then to stanzas 5 and 6. Dusk. They will work tomorrow without him. They know it and walk clear. He has become a typhoid pariah, his blood tainted, although he shares it with some there. No more than snow attends its own flakes, where they settle and melt will they prey by his death rattle. You never will, never you know, but take it well, woman, grow your garden, keep house, goodbye. What images come up once again in the 5th stanza, and what might be the reason for this image being repeated over and over? And so I want to ask you again to pause here and just think about these two stanzas, read them a few times, really come to a deep understanding of them before we go into deeper analysis. Alright, so I would hope you would find the image that we're looking for here, and that is the image of blood coming up for a third time. He keeps bringing up the blood in this stanza, and this is referenced, when I say he, I'm speaking about the speaker, and that's why I keep saying he rather than she for the poet, because the speaker, the poet, is this man speaking, Colonel Jones. His blood tainted. The tainting of the blood, the image of the blood comes up again to highlight the atrocity and amount of life and suffering that went on during the famine. This is why Boland keeps choosing to use this image of blood. Okay? However, here we have the contrast of the colours. We have the blood, which is obviously red, and then we have the snow of the Irish, and that represents possibly the innocence of the Irish, okay, as victims in this situation. Okay? That they are snow that cannot attend its own flakes. Right? If we look at the notes, we return again to the building of Famine Road. The term dusk at the beginning of stanza implies the end of things, so it's the end of the day, and how one of the workers is now expected to die at night. Okay, he's not expected. Everyone knows that he is going to die over the course of the night. He won't be back the next day. It is explained that he has typhoid and is shunned by the others. The speaker here seems to look down upon the family of this man, who will not pray at the death rattle, so they won't be with their family member as he's dying, and judges their actions. But really, what he's not doing is he's not considering the situation they're in or showing compassion to any of them. He is judging them without thinking of what's going on for them. And for these people, they know that being around this person with typhoid could be their own deaths. So we have to, when we're looking at it, we really, there's a total lack of compassion coming across here. He's very much judging starving, desperate people who are doing anything they can to survive because they won't be beside this person. It shows complete lack of understanding from the people in charge of helping the Irish during the famine. There's also a lot of colour imagery being drawn upon the stanza. This is in order to manipulate the audience to a certain degree. The poet, Boland, she's manipulating us into a certain point of view. Okay, now as an Irish audience, we're probably going to have the same point of view already, but she is definitely using this colour imagery to bring us to a certain understanding. Okay, now I use the term manipulate. That's not a negative term. As a craft term. Okay, it's very much what writers always do. Right? But she does it quite expertly here through the use of that colour imagery. Then in the 6th stanza, the repetition of the term never followed by goodbye gives a sense of finality to the stanza, and also draws on empathy from the reader for whatever this woman has lost. So there's a finality. The doctor is very straightforward and final in what he's saying to her, and there's a complete lack of emotion. This woman has been given devastating news. He repeats, you never will, never you know. Repetition shows quite heartless, and then shows no connection in the advice that he gives. But take it well, woman. Basically saying, get over it. Grow your garden, keep house, goodbye. Right? There's very little care here. Just do this, leave. Okay? Absolute, really just total lack of care or empathy from him. So why do you think the poet used the image of snow in her simile at the end of stanza 5? That is most likely bringing on this idea of the innocence of the Irish during this time as victims of this situation. Okay, what news do you think the woman has been given? We know from the end of the stanza that she's been told, from the end of the poem, that she has been told she is not going to have children, right? She is barren. And how would you describe the doctor's attitude toward her? And we would say it's probably quite heartless. Right, moving on to stanzas 7 and 8 then. It has gone better than we expected, Lord Trevelyan. Sedition, idleness, cured and won. From parish to parish, field to field, the wretches work till they are quite worn, they then fester by their work. We march to Corn to the ships in peace. This Tuesday I saw bones out of my carriage window. Your servant, Jones. Baron, never to know the load of his child in you. What is your body now, if not Famine Road? So what's the tone of the speaker in the 7th stanza, and what successes is he describing? So again, I would suggest just pause here for 2 minutes, read through those stanzas again, to get a good understanding of what's going on. Okay, so in the 7th stanza we again see how Jones is very detached from the people he is observing. Okay, we notice how in the last line of the stanza he is in a carriage, so he's both physically and emotionally separated from them. Right? The people have become like bones. Okay, he sees them as walking skeletons, or indeed as skeletons on the as corpses on the ground who have died. He says that he sees them fester by their work, which means they rot beside their work. Their bodies fall where they are working, and they simply decay beside the road. And yet, he says it's gone better than we expected. And what is this better? He says that sedition, idleness are cured in one. So people are no longer lazy and people are no longer committing crimes. But the reason that they're no longer doing this is that people have simply died. Right? So there's very much a Machiavellian kind of point of view that the ends have justified means. There is no longer problems for the British in taking the food out of the country. They can continue to export their food and make money. But they've done it through working the innocent people to death. Okay? So the success here is a economic success, and in terms of being able to continue their business of exporting corn. Okay? So we march the corn to the ships in peace, and yet as a moral message, there's a huge issue here in that they've done this by allowing people and adding to the number of people who are dying. The final stanza brings in a different voice, so this is probably not the doctor now. Baron, never to know the road of his child in you. This is possibly the woman speaking to herself and her own view of what she's now become, right? Or we could say it's someone else speaking to her. The important thing here is the last line, what is your body now if not a famine road? And we know this is important because the famine roads were seen as something that are pretty much useless. They're just there to make people work. And perhaps now she is seeing herself in a similar way. Does she have any use now that she is not able to have children? Okay, so if we just go into some of the notes along here. So the poet has chosen to be quite direct in her critique in the stanza, so this is stanza 7, and outlines the view that the Relief Committee was specifically established to murder and destroy starving communities in Ireland in order to relieve the pressure from the government. Right? So the Relief Committee, uses their name, is quite, just doesn't work. They are essentially set up to relieve the government of the pressure of having to deal with the Irish rather than to relieve the difficulties the Irish are experiencing. Right, so, and in the point of view of the narrative, it seems to come across the point of view that we're being given, the perspective we're being shown, is that they were set up in order to basically murder and destroy the starving communities. There's a clear separation between Speaker Jones and the dying Irish, emphasising the horrors of this history. That the people in charge simply had no empathy for the people they were in charge of. Okay, and that was very much reiterated in the physical separation of him from his carriage and the people on the side of the road. The speaker of the poem lists the successes of having cured the Irish of sedition and idleness throughout the country. However, it is then outlined that this has been achieved through widespread death. The poem seems to support the concept of planned genocide of the Irish people. The British forces intentionally came and added to the death of the Irish in order to protect the economy. "We march the corn to the ships" stands out in emphasizing the cruelty of those in charge who are oriented by profit and not by compassion. Though some of you may be aware of Trevelyan's corn, it is mentioned in the song Feels That Right. Okay, so you have a look back, you hear that song again, this is what they're talking about. The final stanza then, the use of a pause after barren creates the sense of this being a conclusive, defining moment, a clear critique of the expectations of women. Okay, that she has lost her role by not being able to have children, and the poet's really critiquing, is that really what women should be treated as? Is that what women's role in society is? It's definitely, a lot of sexist ideas inherent in that, and by placing it across with the ideas of the famine, she's probably trying to make us think that the cruelty of the people of the British forces and the British authorities towards the Irish during the famine is very comparable to this view of women as being there to have solely to have children. Okay, that's saying there's definitely connections to be drawn here. She's very much trying to make us think about how women are treated as well as how the Irish were treated historically. The poet draws a clear connection between the views which people hold of a woman who is not a mother and the uselessness of the famine roads. It's unclear who speaks the final lines. The harshness of the words may suggest it's the woman herself. She is critiquing herself because of her medical revelation that's come about. What do you think of comparisons drawn at the end of the poem? The comparison is clearly drawn between the famine roads and the harsh history of treatment of the Irish people during the famine to the woman being barren and the harsh treatment of women in society, often by themselves due to societal expectations. So it's very much critiquing society's view of what society tells women they should be. And do you find the ending of the poem powerful and confusing? It is very, very, you're going to have to read through the poem a few times probably to understand exactly what's going on, but it is a very, very powerful ending, a very clear message being sent home. Okay, so to take away from this poem, two questions to think about. The poet omits the voice of the victims in the poem. Okay, so the Irish starving do not have a voice, and neither do they're just a woman. Sorry. So neither of them are given a voice in the poem. Okay, so you could compare this. If you think about Durkin's wife who smashed the television gets jailed. Again, we see the victim or the woman not being given a voice there. So here you could say that again pointing out misogyny in the world. Do you think the poet has been effective in how they have sculpted the structure of the poem? Explain your answer in detail. So two questions there, just to think about and go away.